Well, it's very interesting when you give a talk in that people come up to you afterwards, or they email you, or they put comments onto Twitter these days. So I've been very heartened by a lot of the positive comments made, but equally one or two people have asked me for clarification, because we only had 1 hour exactly. There were some areas that I would have liked perhaps to have said a little bit more on. 2 or 3 people asked me about the leadership dimension, and when I was giving the talk I felt that I was saying quite a lot about leadership, but perhaps that was implicit rather than explicit. The first point that I would make is that for leaders, space is one of the very important resources which they need to take account of. If we look at physical space, virtual space in particular, huge amounts of money are spent by organizations on providing these facilities. And I'm not confident that most leaders really understand the connection between their investments in physical and virtual spaces and the value which is achieved, particularly in relation to the creation and sharing of knowledge. The second aspect is that all leaders need to be concerned with individual creativity, and I don't see enough serious questions being asked at the top about whether the ambience and the arrangements between physical, virtual and imaginative spaces actually are delivering enough individual and team creativity. I see too many office buildings being put up where the fundamental need for those offices isn't getting discussed. So we get wonderful buildings, we have and expensive buildings, but are they fit for the purpose of knowledge work? This is the job of top management to ask these questions. We cannot expect architects to have an intimate understanding of knowledge, innovation and creativity. That's what top managers are there from. So I would say to these senior executives, when you get a request for new office buildings, you should be asking what value we're going to get from this, particularly in this day and age, in terms of the creation and sharing of knowledge. Another aspect of space, especially when we look at virtual spaces, is do executives think about the alternative ways that they can use virtual spaces? When I started out in business, you had post and you had telephone, and in fact actually we had telegrams as well. So we had a very limited range of ways that we could communicate. Today, all that has been largely replaced by email and social media. And I don't see many of today's senior executives who have an intuitive grasp of the full range of modern media for communication purposes relative to what perhaps they had experiences like me with the older media. So I think the virtual space is a very important one, particularly for internal communications and obviously to some extent for external as well. At the micro level, any senior executive is faced with decisions. And one of the decisions, if we take physical spaces, where do I have a meeting? There are many subtleties involved in this question of where you have a meeting, especially where that meeting is about innovation and creativity. I think often we see quite a banal viewpoint taken on that, and not enough subtlety brought into the situation. And obviously it's often very convenient to meet in one's own office if you're a senior executive. But I think we could do with more work and research on the diverse types of spaces which might achieve different things in a business management context. I've sadly come to the conclusion that physical space, though to me it's a very important part of the knowledge management infrastructure, is actually managerially invisible. Most people just take their physical space for granted and they don't see it as an opportunity to be proactively deployed. And the thing that scares me most is when I see highly standardized office buildings same sort of furniture everywhere, clearly designed by an architect, implemented by a workspace design team, and with very little opportunity for the frontline staff to have their say. That's why I laid so much emphasis on the engagement with frontline people, the actual users, or in the case of a university, our own students. We've tried to engage with students. We haven't done enough on that, but I think we are trying to do more on that. But that's why I placed the importance towards the end of the talk on Lefebvre's work. His idea that there were three types of ways that we could produce space. The first, which is in the domain of the architect and the designer, it doesn't lead to the final product. He called what they did the conception space, conçu, almost a theory of space. Space is actually produced by the people who use that space, which is what he called perçu. But Lefebvre was most interested with the users of space, in our case in the university, the students and the faculty, the way that they then convert that space to meet their own ends, which is why I use the term bricolage in the presentation. And our experience is that frontline users of space are going to come up with ideas which are way beyond what any architect or designer or even senior executive could come up with. So they have got very huge demands and interests, and they will subvert banal physical spaces to create, even for half an hour or an hour, a temporary space which can be highly imaginative and lead to high levels of creativity. So I feel I underestimated, perhaps in the percentage of time I spent in the talk, the role of the leader. I believe the leader has a fundamental role, and the role that many leaders take today in relation to spaces, physical, virtual, imaginative, is that they either abdicate from it or they neglect it. And I believe my message to leaders and people who are future leaders and the advisors of leaders is please take your physical, virtual, and imaginative spaces more seriously, put more of your own time into it, and to some extent model your own behavior around the type of innovative and creative behavior you would like to promote. So thanks for giving me a chance to say a few extra words.